The afternoon light was fading over Manhattan when Alessandro Moretti took his seat on the stone bench, as he had done every day for the past 3 years. The park was a small one, tucked between the pre-war buildings of the Upper East Side, and at this hour it belonged mostly to the pigeons and the old men on their evening walk. Golden light filtered through the maples, catching in the yellow and copper of the late autumn leaves. He could feel the warmth of it on the side of his face. He could not see it. To Alessandro, the world had become a single wash of dark gray, softened here and there by paler patches where the sun struck strongest. Colors were memory. Faces were memory. The sky he had once looked up at from the deck of his yacht was, now, only the feeling of open air above him and the sound of wind moving through leaves he could not name. He sat perfectly still. Black sunglasses, white cane leaning against his knee, a custom Italian suit, black, cut close to the shoulder, the wool soft and heavy as it had always been. His hair was combed back. His jaw carried 2 days of stubble. He was 37 years old. He looked closer to 40. He felt closer to 60. 20 meters away, a black Cadillac idled at the curb. Marco Rossi leaned against the driver's side door, arms folded, an earpiece coiled against his neck, a compact pistol tucked beneath the tailored line of his vest. Marco had been with him for 15 years. Marco did not sit. Marco did not speak unless spoken to. If Alessandro had told him to end a man at that distance, Marco would not have asked why, because Alessandro Moretti was not simply a blind man on a park bench. He was the head of the Moretti family, the most powerful mafia boss in the 5 boroughs of New York. His name moved money across 3 continents. His signature had ended more lives than most soldiers saw in a war. There was a price on his head in Sicily and a file on his desk at the FBI, and none of it, in the end, had meant anything. 3 years ago, a rare disease had taken his sight. Doctors in Zurich, in Boston, in Tokyo. No treatment, no hope. Progressive, they had said. Adapt. He had not adapted. He had come to this bench. He came here every afternoon at 4 o'clock, not because it comforted him, but because he no longer knew where else to go. The penthouse was silent. The office was a room where men now spoke softer around him. The church he had abandoned 20 years ago. He was 37 years old, blind, at the top of an empire, and he had never in his life felt so completely, so quietly, forgotten. There was a God once, he thought, or he thought he had thought so, but that God had turned his face away, and there was nothing left in the dark but a cold bench and a colder heart. The wind shifted through the leaves, and then, very softly, he heard it. Small footsteps, coming closer along the gravel path, slowing and stopping, exactly in front of him. "Sir, may I sit here beside you?" The voice was small, careful, the kind of voice that had learned early to be polite before it asked for anything. Alessandro turned his face toward the sound. In the wash of gray that was now his world, he could make out only a slight, low shape standing an arm's length in front of him. A child, a very small child, 5 years old perhaps, maybe 6. The voice was too soft, too polite, to belong to a boy. For a moment he did not answer. Children did not approach him. Adults did not approach him, either. There was something about the way he sat, or the black car 20 meters away, or the shape of Marco Rossi against the paint of it, that told people to walk around this bench. "You may," he said. He heard the soft weight settle onto the far end of the stone, a full, careful distance from him. He heard the tap of little shoes not quite touching the ground. He heard, very faintly, the sound of her breathing. "Sir," she said, "why are you wearing dark glasses when the sun isn't strong?" He almost smiled. Almost. "Because my eyes are sick." She thought about that. "And this stick?" she asked. "What is it for?" "It helps me walk, so I don't fall." "Oh." She said the word the way children do, absorbing something entirely new about the world, filing it away carefully. Then she said nothing more, and Alessandro found himself listening for her, which was a strange thing to notice about himself. 20 meters away, Marco Rossi did not move, but his shoulders had gone still in a way that only Alessandro would have recognized if he could have seen him. In 15 years of service, Marco had watched his boss dismiss senators, cardinals, and men who begged for their lives on marble floors. He had never once seen him tolerate a stranger this close. He touched the earpiece at his throat, said nothing into it, and waited. The phone in Alessandro's inner pocket began to vibrate. Marco was there in 3 strides. He placed the phone into his boss's open hand without a word and stepped back. "Yes," Alessandro said. The voice on the other end spoke fast and low. Alessandro listened. "The Boston shipment," he said finally. "The container at the port. It moves tonight. Or it doesn't move at all. I don't want to hear the name of that captain again. Handle it." He ended the call. Marco took the phone back and returned to the car. Beside him, the little girl had not moved. She was watching a sparrow hop along the gravel near her shoes. She had not understood a single word of what he had said, and she did not care. To her, it had only been grown-up talk, the kind adults did on phones, and the sparrow was more interesting. Then, in the quiet that followed, she tilted her small face toward him. "Sir," she said, "are you sad?" Alessandro went very still. The wind moved once through the leaves above them. Somewhere behind him, a car passed on the avenue. His hand tightened, very slightly, on the smooth curve of the cane at his knee. He opened his mouth. He did not answer. The next afternoon, at exactly 4 o'clock, Alessandro Moretti was on the bench. He had told himself, walking from the car, that he had come because the doctor had recommended fresh air. He had told himself that the light hurt less at this hour. He had told himself many small, reasonable things, all of them true, and none of them the real thing. The real thing was that he had woken that morning already listening for a voice he did not have a name for. He would not admit, even to himself, that he was waiting. The wind moved, gravel crunched, very lightly, along the path. Small shoes, slower than the day before, as if the child were carrying something and afraid to drop it. "Sir Alessandro," she said, arriving at the bench, "I brought something." He turned his face toward her. So she had learned his name from somewhere, or invented one for him from the way Marco had greeted him. "Sir Alessandro." She said it as if it belonged to a knight in a storybook. He heard her climb onto the bench. He heard the crinkle of thin paper being unwrapped in her lap. Then the tap of her shoes stopped, and she reached across the stone with something in her small hand. "It's a biscuit," she said. "My mother taught me you have to share." He raised his palm. Her fingers found his and pressed half of the biscuit into it, and for a moment his hand closed around hers instead of the food. Her hand was cold. Very cold. Thin as a bundle of small dry sticks. He could feel the shape of every bone. He let go carefully. "Thank you," he said. She began to eat her half with the concentrated seriousness of a child who did not have many biscuits in her life. He held his in his hand and did not eat it yet. "Sir Alessandro," she said, after a while, "is that man over there your friend?" He knew, without needing to look, that she meant Marco. He considered the question. In 20 years he had built an empire on men who obeyed him, feared him, would die for him. He had never in his life used the word friend about any of them. "He works for me," he said. She thought about this. Then she said, with the absolute confidence of a 5-year-old delivering a truth of the universe, "But everyone needs a friend." He did not answer. She began to tell him, unprompted, about her mother, about how her mother had taught her to always say her prayers before sleeping, even if she was very tired, even if there was no bed, about how her mother had said that God listened even to the quietest voice in the world. 20 meters away, Marco Rossi lifted a hand to the earpiece at his throat and spoke very low, into the private channel of the security detail. The boss just smiled. There was a pause on the line. "Repeat," a voice said. The boss just smiled. "I saw it. I'm looking at him right now." On the bench, Alessandro raised the biscuit and bit into it slowly, and the first sweetness in 3 years found him. On the third afternoon, she arrived early. Alessandro had been on the bench for only a few minutes when he heard her small shoes on the gravel. Coming faster today, almost running the last few steps. She climbed onto the stone beside him with an ease that surprised him, as if this bench had always been theirs, as if she had been coming here every day of her life. "Sir Alessandro," she said, a little out of breath, "I thought about something." "Yes? I thought since you can't see, maybe I could tell you what it looks like today, so you would know." He turned his face toward her. He did not speak. She took his silence for permission. She smoothed her small hands on her knees, the way an adult might before beginning a serious task. And she began. "The sky is very blue today. Very, very blue. There are white clouds, big ones, and they look like cotton. Like cotton candy at the fair, but not pink, just white." She paused, thinking about how to say it right. "There's a bunch of birds up there. They're flying in a shape, like a V. My mother told me that means they're going somewhere far, because it's getting cold. Maybe they are going to a warm country, and they know the way because they follow the one in front." He closed his eyes behind the dark lenses. He could almost see it, not with his eyes, somewhere behind his eyes. "The tree in front of us," she went on. "The big one, it has yellow leaves. and some red ones. Not all red, only some. And when the wind comes through it, it doesn't sound like just wind. It sounds like someone whispering, very softly, like a secret. She stopped, uncertain if she had done it well. He was quiet for a long moment. "I haven't seen the sky in 3 years," he said, at last. It was the first time he had said those words out loud to anyone. She thought about that, not with pity. Pity is something adults learn later, and it did not belong to her yet. She thought about it the way she had thought about the sunglasses and the cane, as one more true fact about the man beside her. "But you can still hear it, can't you, sir?" she said. "When the wind comes through the leaves, that's the sky. That's the sky talking. My mother said the sky is always talking. It just doesn't use words." He did not answer her. Inside him, something moved that had been still for a long time. Not a thought. Not a memory. Something smaller and truer than either. A very fine crack, opening in a wall he had built so long ago he had forgotten how to unbuild it. 20 meters away, Marco Rossi stood beside the black Cadillac and watched his boss on the bench. He watched Alessandro Moretti, the head of the Moretti family, the man the underworld feared, slowly lift his face toward the sky. In 15 years of service, in 3 years of blindness, Marco had never once seen him do that. He did not lift his hand to the earpiece. This one, he kept. On the 4th afternoon, she came carrying a small cloth bag. He heard the shape of her arrival before he understood it, the shoes on the gravel, the light thud of something soft against her hip, the very careful way she climbed onto the bench beside him. She did not speak at first. She was busy. He heard the drawstring pull. He heard something being lifted out with the kind of reverence a child gives to only 1 or 2 things in her whole life. "Sir Alessandro," she said, "I brought a book today. A book. My mother's book." She placed it in her lap. He could not see it, but he could hear the age of it, the dry whisper of a cover that had been opened many times, the faint fanning sound of thin pages settling. "It's a Bible," she said. "The cover used to be blue. It's kind of gray now, because it got old, and the corners are worn out. See?" She did not seem to remember, in that moment, that he could not see. She took his hand and guided his fingers to one soft, blunted corner of the book. He felt the frayed cloth beneath his thumb. Someone had held this book, opened this book, closed this book, thousands of times. "It's my mother's," she said again. "She taught me to read on it, before she went away." He did not ask. Not yet. He had heard the small break in her voice on the word away, and he knew, the way he knew many things without needing to be told, that a 5-year-old girl did not carry a book like this alone unless something in the world had already been taken from her. She opened it to a page marked with a thin ribbon of red satin, badly frayed at the ends. She smoothed the page with her palm. Then she leaned close over the words and began to read, slowly, her small finger moving beneath each word the way her mother had taught her. "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." Philippians 4:13. She lifted her finger. She looked up at him. Alessandro did not move. He had built an empire, hundreds of millions of dollars, hundreds of men who would answer his call in the middle of the night. A file in a federal building, with his name on the cover and a bounty on his head from a country he had not seen in 20 years. He had walked into rooms where senators lowered their voices, and now he was sitting on a park bench, listening to a 5-year-old girl with cold hands read to him about strength. "Sir Alessandro," she said, "do you believe in God?" He answered slowly. "I used to, but not now. I thought God had forgotten me." She considered this for a long moment. Then she said, in the same simple voice she had used to describe the sky, "My mother said God never forgets us, even when we forget him." He did not answer her. He did not answer her that afternoon on the bench. He did not answer her when Marco helped him into the black Cadillac. He did not answer her that night, alone in the penthouse, in the dark that was the same to him whether his eyes were open or closed. But her mother's words did not stop. On the 6th afternoon, he arrived early, 3:30. He told Marco to stop the car at the curb, and he walked to the bench without help, the tip of the white cane finding the gravel path the way it had learned to. He sat down. He crossed one hand over the other on the head of the cane. He waited. The wind moved through the maples. He could hear the sound of it exactly the way she had taught him to hear it, someone whispering above him. A language without words. He did not raise his face to the sky today. Today he was listening for something smaller, for shoes on gravel. 4 o'clock. He knew the hour by the way the air changed. The warmth thinned. The traffic on the avenue behind him grew heavier as the city began to come home from work. A woman walked past pushing a stroller. 2 men jogged by, breathing hard, no small footsteps. 4:30. The light was going. He could feel it going even through the dark lenses, the gray of the world sliding a shade deeper into gray. He listened. A dog barked somewhere near the fountain. A boy shouted a name that was not his and not hers. 5 o'clock. The shadow of the maple, he knew, would be long now, stretched all the way across the path. She would have to step through it to reach him. There was no small silhouette moving through it. Something rose in him that he did not have a name for. It was not fear. He had known fear once, 20 years ago, and had cut it out of himself in a warehouse in Brooklyn. It was not anger. Anger he still kept, filed and sharpened, for the men who needed to see it. It was something older than either, something that lived below both, a cold hand closing very slowly around the inside of his ribs. He, Alessandro Moretti, head of the Moretti family, did not allow himself to feel this, not for a stranger, not for anyone, but he was feeling it. Marco Rossi's footsteps came up the path. He knew Marco's walk the way a blind man knows the walk of the one who has stood at his shoulder for 15 years. Marco stopped a respectful step away. "Boss," Marco said, carefully. "She's a kid from the neighborhood. Kids get busy. Maybe her mother needed her at home." The silence on the bench lasted a long time. Somewhere in the trees, the sky whispered. "Find her," Alessandro said. "Now." Marco did not move for a moment. In 10 years at his boss's side, in an empire that had ordered the movement of ships across oceans and the ending of men across borders, he had never once heard that order given for the sake of a child no one owed anything to. "Yes, boss." Marco went. Alessandro sat for another minute. Then he stood, unfolded the white cane, and did something he had not done in 3 years since the darkness had come. He walked forward, into the park, alone, tapping the gravel ahead of him step by careful step, following the sound of the wind toward wherever a small girl with cold hands might have gone. Marco found the flower woman first. She was closing her cart at the north gate, a heavy woman with a wool shawl and hands that had been in cold water all day. Marco crossed the gravel to her without hurry. He did not show a badge. He did not show anything at all. He simply asked, in the quiet, even tone of a man who was used to being answered, whether she knew a small girl of about 5, thin, polite, who came to the park every afternoon at 4. The woman looked at him, and then past him, at the man in the black suit standing very still with a white cane in the fading light. "The little one with the cloth bag," she said. "Yes, she sleeps back there." The woman jerked her chin toward the far end of the park, past the last of the maples, where the wrought iron fence met the back of an abandoned brick building. "There's a few of them who put up shelters. She's one of the smallest. I bring her bread when I have some left over." Marco returned to his boss. He did not need to explain. Alessandro had heard. "Take me," Alessandro said. Marco took his arm at the elbow, a service he had not offered in 3 years, because Alessandro had never permitted it, and this time Alessandro did not pull away. The path narrowed. The maples gave way to thinner trees, and then to no trees at all, only a stretch of packed dirt and the smell of old rain. Marco slowed. Ahead, against the back wall, stood 3 or 4 shelters made of what people threw away, sheet metal, cardboard, plastic tarps weighted with bricks. The smallest of them had a door made from a warped piece of wood, held together with 2 nails driven crooked. Marco pushed it open. Inside it was very dark. It smelled of damp cloth. On the packed earth floor, a thin blanket had been spread, and on the blanket a child was curled on her side, knees drawn up. Her face was turned toward the door. Her cheeks were red, the deep red of a fever that had been rising for hours. Her lips were parted. Her breathing was fast and shallow. Beside her, open on the blanket where her small hand had let it fall, lay a Bible with a worn gray-blue cover. It was open to a page marked with a frayed red ribbon. Philippians. She had tried to read before she could not read anymore. Alessandro Moretti, head of the Moretti family, knelt down on the dirt floor of a shack behind a park in Manhattan. He had not knelt for anyone or anything in 20 years. Not for his father in the ground. Not for a priest. Not for a god. He knelt now. He put his hand on her forehead. The heat under his palm was terrible. It was the kind of heat that meant hours, not minutes. Her eyes opened, barely. She saw the dark shape leaning over her. She recognized it. Sir Alessandro. Her voice was a thread. "You came for me?" Behind him, Marco spoke fast and low, giving what the neighbors had told him. Father dead in a construction accident 2 years ago. Mother taken by cancer 8 months back. No one else. No one at all. Alessandro's whole body went still. "Get her in the car," he said. "Street. Michael's hospital. Now." The black Cadillac cut through the evening traffic with the horn silent and the tires eating the wet asphalt of Manhattan. Alessandro sat in the back seat, with the little girl held against his chest. He had refused to lay her on the leather. He held her the way a man holds something he does not yet know he is allowed to keep. Her head rested against the wool of his lapel. Her breath came fast and small at the base of his throat. She weighed almost nothing, perhaps 45 pounds, perhaps less. He had held briefcases heavier than this child. In the arms of a man who did not remember the last time he had held anything living, the weight of her registered like an injury. Her mother's Bible lay in his other hand. He had reached back for it before Marco could close the shack door. Street. Michael's rose against the dark on the west side of the park, the most expensive private hospital in Manhattan. 12 floors of pale stone and blackened glass. Alessandro carried her through the main entrance himself. The night nurse behind the desk saw who was carrying the child and stood up before he had reached her. A private room, Alessandro said. Upper floor, with a window that looks onto the garden. Not a ward, not the pediatric wing. A private room. Yes, Mr. Moretti. Dr. Enrico Falcone, the chief of medicine, met them in the corridor before the elevator. He was still in the shirt he had worn to dinner. He did not ask questions. He looked at the child in Alessandro's arms and put a hand under her jaw, listening at her temple. And then he was walking beside them, giving orders down the hall in a voice that emptied rooms. By 10 o'clock she was on white sheets, in a room on the 8th floor, with a window that would open onto a small enclosed garden at dawn. An IV line ran into the back of her hand. Cool cloths lay across her forehead. Her breathing was still fast, but it had a shape now. It was breathing that a machine was helping. Falcone came out of the room and closed the door behind him. Severe pneumonia, he said quietly, complicated by long-term malnutrition and exposure. She will need 3 to 5 days of treatment. She will recover. She should not have been left this long. Whatever she needs, Alessandro said. Whatever it costs. Falcone inclined his head and went back inside. Alessandro sat down in the chair beside the bed. He did not leave it. At some hour past midnight, Marco Rossi's voice came in his earpiece, low and careful, giving the rest of what he had found. After the mother had died, social services had come for the child. She had run from them. She had begged in the park, slept in the shack that an old homeless woman had built her out of scrap. The old woman had died 1 month ago. The child had been alone in that shack ever since. Alessandro closed his eyes behind the dark glasses. He had not felt anything this real in more years than he could count. He reached out. He found her small hand on the sheet. He wrapped his fingers around it, and in the silence, he made a promise that he did not yet dare to say aloud, not even to himself. Past midnight, the hospital had gone quiet in the way only hospitals go quiet, not silence, but the low continuous hum of machines and distant footsteps and one nurse turning a page at a station down the hall. In the room on the 8th floor, the little girl slept. Her fever had come down a little. The rise and fall of her chest under the sheet was slower now, less frightened. On the bedside table, her mother's Bible lay closed, the frayed red ribbon marking the page. Alessandro rose from the chair beside her bed. He crossed the room to the window. He stood there for a long moment. Through the dark lenses he could not see the moon, but he could feel the pale wash of it against his face, a shade lighter than the gray that filled the rest of his world. Somewhere out there, above the city, there was a sky. She had described it to him. He had not seen it in 3 years. Slowly, he reached up and took off the dark glasses. He held them in his hand. He looked at nothing. He set them down on the bedside table beside the Bible. Then he closed his eyes. Open or closed, it was the same. And then, after a very long moment, he did what he had not done in 20 years. He lowered himself to his knees beside the bed of a sleeping child, the wool of his trousers pressed into the tile, his hands folded on the edge of the mattress, near the small shape of her hand. He bent his head. His breath left him in a way he had not felt it leave him since he was a boy in a church in Little Italy, before his father had died on those steps and the door had closed behind him for good. He began to speak, barely a voice, a rasp under the hum of the machines. "Lord," he said, "I know I have been far from you for a long time. I have blamed you for my eyes, for the loneliness, for everything. I have lived in the dark so long that I forgot you." His throat closed. He stopped, and had to work to open it again. "But I am not asking for my eyes tonight." Something wet moved at the corner of one of them. "I am asking for her. Please do not take her. She has not done anything to deserve this. She is 5 years old and she has been alone in that shack since her mother died, and she still shares her bread with strangers. She still reads the words, 'You gave her. Please, Lord, do not take her.'" The wet ran down his face now. He did not lift his hand to it. If anyone has to pay for what I have done, let it be me. I have earned it. Every account. Take me. Do not take her. The wind moved outside the window. The curtain lifted, once, and settled. He stayed on his knees for a long time after the words were gone. Then, very softly, so softly that only he and the sleeping child and whoever else was listening could have heard it, he said, "Amen." 3 days passed. The little girl's fever broke on the second morning. By the third, she was sitting up long enough to drink water from a cup and ask the nurse whether the sparrows in the enclosed garden had names. She slept most of the hours in between. Alessandro did not leave the room. He ate what Marco brought him without noticing what it was. He slept in the chair beside her bed, when he slept at all. On the fourth morning, at a little before 5 o'clock, he woke. The room was quiet. The machines hummed. The little girl breathed evenly on the pillow beside him. He opened his eyes. He stopped. Something was different. The light coming through the curtain was not a pale patch of gray. It had color. It had shape. He could see the line of the window frame behind the fabric. He could see the fabric itself moving very slightly, in a slow breath of air, the way something moves when it is really there. He did not move for a long moment. He was afraid to. He was afraid that if he shifted his weight, or blinked too hard, the world would slide back down into gray and this would prove to have been a dream. Slowly, the way a man walks on ice, he rose from the chair. He crossed the tile floor toward the window. He reached out. His fingers found the edge of the curtain. He drew it back. The early light of morning came into his face. The real, cold, blue-lit morning of Manhattan, just before the sun cleared the buildings on the east side of the park. He saw the outlines of the towers on the horizon. He saw the sky above them, a deep blue giving way, along one seam, to the softest violet he had ever seen. He saw a single early bird cross the frame of the window, dark against the color. Tears he could not have stopped rolled down his face. He turned. For the first time in 3 years, he saw her. She was small in the white bed. Her hair was the color of dark honey, and it lay tangled on the pillow around a very thin face. There was a small pale scar high on her left cheek. She was breathing softly, one hand curled up beneath her jaw, the way children sleep when they are safe. She was, in that morning light, more beautiful than anything he had ever earned, or bought, or taken in his whole life. She stirred. Her eyes opened. She saw the shape of him standing by the window in the pale blue light, and she saw that he was crying. "Sir Alessandro," she said, alarmed. "What's wrong?" He came to her. He knelt down beside the bed the way he had knelt there in the dark, and he took her small hand between both of his. "I can see you," he said. "Annie, I can see you." Her eyes went very wide. She stared at him. Then her small arms went up around his neck, and she pulled herself against him and held on. "I told you," she whispered against his shoulder. "God never forgets us." He held her for a long time. Behind him, the door opened. Dr. Falcone stepped inside, stopped, and stared. He crossed the room, lifted his penlight, and looked into Alessandro's eyes for a very long time. He lowered the light. "Medicine," he said quietly, "does not have an answer for this." She was discharged after a week. By then the color had come back to her face, and the small scar on her cheek no longer looked like the only clean thing about her. She wore a new coat that Marco had bought at a shop on Madison, too big at the shoulders, and she carried her mother's Bible tucked against her chest with both arms, the way she had carried it into the shack and out of it. The black Cadillac took them north along the park. They stopped in front of a 3-story limestone townhouse on a quiet side street off 5th Avenue. Wrought iron gates, a long walk of pale stone, 20 rooms behind the tall windows, though from the sidewalk it looked like only a beautiful private home. Alessandro stepped out. He offered the little girl his hand. She took it, and she looked up. Her eyes went round. "Sir Alessandro," she said softly, "is this your house?" He looked down at her. He looked up at the tall windows of the place he had lived alone for 15 years. "It could be your house," he said. "If you want it to be." She did not understand at first. He led her up the stone walk and through the door into the front hall. The chandelier caught what light there was and made small rainbows on the marble. She stood in the middle of the floor holding her Bible and staring at the ceiling as if she had walked into a cathedral. Alessandro turned to her. And then he did something he had not done for anyone in his adult life. He knelt. Not the way he had knelt in the hospital room in the dark that had been for God. This was for her. He lowered himself onto one knee on the marble so that his eyes were level with hers. "Annie," he said, "I would like to ask you something, and you can say no." She waited. "I would like to be your father." I would like you to live here, to grow up here. I would like to adopt you." She did not speak. "I am not a perfect man. I have a past that you do not understand yet. And maybe one day I will have to explain some of it to you. And I am not looking forward to that day. But I promise you this. I will protect you. I will raise you. I will be there whenever you need me, for as long as I am alive." She looked down at her mother's Bible. She held it tightly against her small chest. She thought for a long time the kind of thinking that only a child who has lost everything knows how to do. Then she looked up. "But I don't have anything to give you," she said. Alessandro smiled. It was the first real smile in more years than he could count. "You have already given me everything I lost," he said. "Faith, light, a reason to wake up in the morning. I am the one who has nothing, Annie, not you." She stared at him. Her lower lip trembled. Then she stepped forward and put both arms around his neck. "Then," she whispered, "you're the family God sent me." Behind them, in the doorway, a small older woman in a black dress was already waiting Rosa, the housekeeper, her eyes bright to take a very small hand and lead her upstairs to a soft pink room full of picture books and a 4-poster bed with white curtains. 3 weeks passed, and the house was not the same house. The maids noticed it first. They noticed it in the small, changed sounds of the mornings, a light patter of shoes running down the second-floor hallway, a small voice singing to itself in the sunroom, a bright peal of laughter that broke against the tall ceilings and hung there like something the marble had been waiting 20 years to hold. For 20 years the Moretti townhouse had been a house of low voices and closed doors. Now there was a child in it, and the walls had learned the sound. Annie skidded across the polished floors in socks. She dragged a new stuffed rabbit by one ear through every room she was allowed into. She named the 2 koi in the garden pond after saints she had learned from her mother Peter and Paul, and she introduced them, gravely, to Rosa. Rosa laughed. The old housekeeper had not laughed like that since before she had come to work for the family. She had begun to sing again in the kitchen, small hymns under her breath while she peeled apples, and she pretended not to notice when Alessandro paused in the doorway to listen. Alessandro himself was changed, and everyone in the house saw it. There was a softness at the edges of him that had not been there. He listened when the child spoke. He answered her questions about the color of the leaves. He learned her routine, and he adjusted his own around it. But the other thing had not gone. It was still in him, and it would not leave in 3 weeks, and perhaps it would not leave at all. One afternoon a phone call from Marco Rossi came through about a shipment at the port. Alessandro took the call in the library with the door closed. His voice was flat and low and cold as slate, and the matter was handled in 30 seconds, and a man in New Jersey went pale on the other end of the line. Then he opened the door, and he was a father again, and Annie ran to him because her drawing had a bird in it. He began to hand more of the work over to Marco. 15 years of loyalty had earned Marco this a formal promotion to primary manager, a wider set of keys. Alessandro kept the family's name and the final word, but the weight of the daily thing shifted to shoulders that had already carried much of it. Annie was enrolled at Sacred Heart, a small private school 6 blocks away. Alessandro himself drove her in the mornings and picked her up in the afternoons. A second car followed at a discreet distance. Every evening at the long dining table, she reported the day. Miss Bennett, her teacher, had brought a globe. Her friend was called Sophia. In art class she had drawn, in careful crayon, a stone bench under a very tall tree, with 2 figures on it, one big, one small. Before dinner Alessandro did something he had not done in 20 years. He reached his hand across the table. He took her small hand in his. He bowed his head. Late one night, after she had been put to bed, he sat alone in the library. On the low table beside his chair lay her mother's Bible. He opened it. For the first time in his grown life, he began to read. On Sunday morning, they went to Mass. Annie had asked for it 3 nights in a row at the dinner table. Not loudly. In the small, careful way she asked for anything. Alessandro had said yes on the 3rd night, and she had gone very still, and then she had smiled the way she had smiled when he had told her she could stay. The Cadillac stopped on 5th Avenue. He stepped out first, into the cold, clear light of a Manhattan Sunday, and he looked up. The twin spires of street. Patrick's rose above him against a hard blue sky. He had not looked up at them in 20 years. He had not walked into a church since the morning he had watched his father shot dead on the steps of Old Street. Patrick's down in Little Italy. He had been 17. He had closed a door that day, inside himself, and he had not opened it since. He had passed this cathedral 1,000 times in 1,000 cars, and never once had he lifted his eyes to it. He had lifted them now. Annie took his hand. It was her hand that led him 5 years old, wearing a small navy coat and the plain silver cross Rosa had put around her neck that morning, up the wide stone steps and through the tall carved doors. Inside, he stopped. He saw it all with his given-back eyes. The high stone reaching up into shadow, the rows of pale candles trembling in their red glass along the side aisles, the statues of the Virgin and the saints in their niches, the gold of the altar catching what light came through the great rose window. He heard the organ begin somewhere above and behind them, a low chord that filled the space the way water fills a bowl. Annie led him to the third pew. She sat down first, straight-backed, and she folded her hands the way her mother had taught her. He sat beside her. The priest was an old man with white hair and a soft voice. He read the gospel and then he preached. His subject that morning was that God chooses the smallest to save the greatest. He told the story of David and Goliath, of the boy with the sling and 5 smooth stones, standing before the giant that no army had dared to face. Alessandro sat very still. It was as if the old priest were speaking only to him. Beside him, Annie slid the worn gray-blue Bible from her lap and placed it, very quietly, into his hands. "It's yours now too," she whispered. "Papa." He did not have time to answer her. He did not have time to think. The tears were already in his eyes before he had understood the word she had chosen. She had never said it before. She had never given him that name. He bowed his head over her mother's book in his hands. He prayed silently. "Thank you. Thank you for not forgetting me, even when I forgot you." When Mass ended, they walked out together into the bright, cold light of Fifth Avenue, hand in hand. He blinked in the sun. He could see the whole city. He could see her. He did not see, 3 blocks north, the black car parked against the curb, and the man inside it, lowering a pair of field glasses from his eyes. Across the river, in the South Bronx, the room was a different world. It was the office on the 3rd floor of an old nightclub on a street where nothing else opened before dark. The windows were painted over. The lamps were low, yellow, tired. Cigar smoke hung in the air in a thick, unmoving layer that had been settling there for hours. On the far wall, in a heavy gilt frame, hung the portrait of a man in a black suit, painted 20 years ago, before someone had put 3 bullets in him on a curb in Queens. Behind the wide oak desk sat Vittorio De Luca. He was 45, and he wore his age well. His hair had gone iron and salt at the temples, thick and combed back from a heavy forehead. A pale scar cut across his jaw, where a knife had once tried and failed. His eyes had the flat quality of eyes that no longer registered fear, in himself or in anyone else. He was the head of the De Luca family, and he had lost territory, men, and money to the Morettis for 15 years, and he had never once given the impression of forgetting a single count of it. He turned a glass of whiskey slowly on the wood. He did not drink. 2 of his men stood on the other side of the desk. The older of the 2 was speaking. "Moretti has gone soft, boss. 3 weeks now. He hasn't come to a single family meeting. He signs paper, he gives orders through Rossi, but he's not on the street. He's spending his time at the townhouse." Vittorio said nothing. The younger man reached inside his coat and placed a photograph face up on the desk. He slid it across the wood. Vittorio looked down. The photograph showed a little girl in a small navy coat, walking out of a school gate. A man in a dark overcoat was waiting for her on the sidewalk. She had reached up, and he had bent down, and their hands were joined between them. The angle of his face was the angle of a man who was smiling. Vittorio looked at the photograph for a long time. His finger began to tap, very slowly, against the oak. Once, twice, 3 times. Then his mouth moved. It was not exactly a smile. It was the shape a mouth makes when it has finally found the door it has been looking for. "There it is," he said, softly. 15 years, and finally he has a weakness. He looked up at the older man. Her routine, school times, the route home, which driver takes her, which car follows, how many men, where they park, where they don't. "I want every hour of that child's week on my desk by Friday." "Yes, boss, and nothing yet. Not a word on the street, not a shadow near the school. If Moretti hears anyone breathing on that block before I say so, I will personally cut the throat that did the breathing." "Yes, boss." The men left. The door closed. Vittorio De Luca sat alone with the photograph. He lifted the glass of whiskey at last. He held it out toward the empty air across the desk, as if toward someone who could not see him raising it. "Cheers, Alessandro," he said. "Get ready to hand the empire back." He drank. Wednesday afternoon, 3:15. The black Cadillac pulled up to the wrought iron gates of Sacred Heart in a line of other cars, indistinguishable from any other parent waiting in Manhattan traffic. 2 of Alessandro's men were inside the driver at the wheel, the second in the passenger seat with a hand resting inside his jacket. A second SUV waited half a block back, 4 more men in it. Annie came out through the gate with the other small girls in their navy coats. She spotted the Cadillac, waved once, and climbed into the back seat with her drawing book. And I did a tree, and Sophia said it looked like a real tree, and Miss Bennett put mine on the wall. That's good, miss. Papa's going to see it. She said the word Papa, the way she had been saying it now for a week. Carefully, as if she were still testing that it belonged to her, the Cadillac reached the intersection of 76th Street. 2 black SUVs came out of nowhere. The first cut across the front of the Cadillac at speed and slammed to a stop, blocking the intersection. The second closed in from behind, sealing the trap. Doors opened before the tires had stopped moving. Men in dark clothes and dark masks poured out. Gunfire. The guard in the front passenger seat did not have time to draw. The window beside him shattered inward, and he slumped against the door. The driver reached for his weapon and was hit twice through the shoulder before he cleared the holster. The rear door of the Cadillac was ripped open. A gloved hand reached in and closed around Annie's arm. She screamed. She held onto her drawing bag with both hands as if the bag were her mother. The SUV, 4 men behind, opened fire from cover and put one of the attackers on the asphalt, but there were too many of them, and the angles were wrong. Annie was lifted bodily out of the Cadillac and carried, still screaming, to the rear SUV. The door slammed. The vehicle tore away from the intersection and was already accelerating east, cutting through traffic, headed toward the on-ramp of the Queensboro Bridge. The last surviving guard from the trailing car crawled behind a parked van with blood on his sleeve and hit the emergency channel on his radio. His voice came through, cracked, breathing hard. The boss's daughter is taken. Repeat, the boss's daughter is taken. Black SUV, plates obscured, eastbound toward the Queensboro. 6 blocks away, in the library of the Moretti townhouse, Alessandro was reading. He had a glass of red wine in one hand and a book of Psalms open on his knee. The library door opened without a knock. Marco Rossi crossed the room in 5 strides. His face was the color of paper. His voice, when he spoke, was a rasp he could not smooth out. Boss, they took Annie. Alessandro stood, slowly. The wine glass slipped out of his hand and hit the marble at his feet. It broke. His eyes, the eyes that Faith had given back to him one blue morning, lifted to Marco's face. And in them, for the first time in a very long time, something old woke up. At 4 o'clock, the encrypted phone on the library table began to hum. Alessandro picked it up. The message had no sender, only a single video file, and the small blue arrow that waited to be touched. He touched it. The screen filled with a bare concrete wall, badly lit from above. In the center of the frame stood a wooden chair. Bound to the chair, wrists behind her, ankles roped to the legs, was a small figure in a navy coat with a strip of gray cloth pulled tight across her mouth. Her eyes were open. They were red. She had been crying for a long time. When the camera moved, she flinched. The lens pushed in, held on her face for a moment, and then pulled back. A shadow moved into the frame from the right. A man stepped into the shot. Iron gray hair combed back, a scar along the jawline, a dark suit. He walked to the chair with an unhurried step, and he laid one hand on the child's shoulder. She trembled under it. He did not remove his hand. Vittorio De Luca looked into the camera. Alessandro, he said. His voice was even. It has been a long time, old friend. He let the silence sit for a beat. Here's what I want. All of Manhattan. The port, the warehouses, every operation, every route, every account. Signed over. 24 hours from the time you are watching this. If it is not done, the girl pays. His hand tightened, very slightly, on Annie's small shoulder. Her whole body flinched under it, and a sound came out of her behind the gag, and the video did not cut away from it. Choose, old friend. The screen went black on the sound of her crying. Alessandro stood in the library with the phone in his hand. He did not move. He did not blink. He did not speak. Marco Rossi and 2 of the senior men had come into the room while the video played. They stood by the tall doors, waiting. None of them dared to be the first to say anything. The silence in the library was the kind of silence men remember for the rest of their lives. At last Alessandro spoke, and his voice was calm, a calm that was worse than any shout would have been. Mobilize everything. Every contact, every informant, every debt any man in this family has ever been owed. I want a location within 12 hours. There will be no negotiation with DeLuca. There will be no compromise. Marco stepped forward. Boss, he said, 24. I am not handing him New York, Marco, Alessandro said quietly. But I am not losing my daughter either. He set the phone down on the table. He walked out of the library without another word. He crossed the hall, entered his private study, and closed the door behind him. Inside, on the small side table near the window, stood the small carved statue of the Virgin that Annie had placed there the week before. He knelt on the rug in front of it. He did not pray for the rescue to succeed. He prayed that whatever happened next, whatever it cost him, whatever he had to become again, she would be kept safe inside it. Outside the door, Marco Rossi stood very still. For the first time in 15 years, he was watching his boss pray. By 10 o'clock at night, the Moretti intelligence had a trail. They had pulled traffic camera footage from the Queensboro Bridge and matched the SUV's silhouette crossing at 3:21. From there, a gas station camera in Long Island City had caught the same vehicle turning north on the boulevard at 3:34, and finally, an old dock worker who owed the family more favors than his pension was worth had made a call from a payphone in the Bronx. The SUV had gone into the industrial belt at Hunts Point, and it had not come out. Marco Rossi spread a large paper map across the study table. Here, he said. He tapped a black rectangle at the edge of the water. Old steel plant, abandoned about 15 years, roughly 3 hectares, multiple entrances, 3 floors, with a mezzanine on the top level. The chain link is down in 6 places. He picked it because he can hold it. Alessandro stood over the map. He did not sit. The senior men stood around the edges of the table with their coats still on. Boss, Marco said. This could be a trap. DeLuca knows we're coming. He wants us to come. He has more men there than we have counted. And he has the ground. Let me take the assault. You stay here. Command it from the study. I bring her back to you. Alessandro heard him out. He looked at the map for another moment. Then he turned and crossed the study to the wall behind his desk. He entered a code. A panel slid open. The safe inside had not been opened in 3 years. He drew out the pistol. It was a Beretta 92, black, familiar to the shape of his hand in a way that only a tool used across a decade can be. He had not touched it since the day the darkness had come. He turned it in his palm. He checked the slide. He loaded the magazine. His hand did not tremble. His eyes, given back to him one blue morning 3 weeks ago, were open and clear. He looked at Marco. She is my daughter, he said. I go in. Marco lowered his head. He did not argue further. In 15 years he had learned when to argue and when to bow. They laid out the plan across the map. 2 o'clock in the morning. 3 teams entering at once. Ground floor at the south loading bay. Side door on the east wall. Rooftop drop from the north. Alessandro would move with the second team, the sharpest men in the family, 6 of them, through the east door. The men left the study to prepare. Alessandro remained. He walked alone to his private room. On the bedside table lay the small worn Bible with the gray-blue cover and the frayed red ribbon. Her mother's book. His book. Now, too. He picked it up. He did not open it. He slid it into the inside pocket of his coat, over the left side of his chest, and pressed his hand against the wool once to feel the shape of it against his ribs. Then he went down. The line of black Cadillacs rolled out of the courtyard of the Moretti townhouse with their headlights killed. The only light on their long polished hoods was the moon. 2 o'clock in the morning. The old steel plant stood against the Bronx sky as a single black block. Its windows broken in patterns, weeds against the base of the walls, rust and old water in the air. 3 teams of the Moretti family moved in from 3 sides, quiet, low, at exactly the same minute. The first shots came from the ground floor at the south loading bay. Muzzle flashes lit the concrete in yellow bursts. Men fell. The Moretti advance did not stop. Alessandro moved with the second team through the east door and into the main corridor. The Beretta was steady in his hand. His eyes, given back to him, tracked movement in the dark better than he had any right to expect. A man came around the corner ahead. Alessandro fired twice. The man went down. They crossed the corridor and reached the stairwell. On the second floor landing the fighting was worst. 2 of DeLuca's men had cover behind an old machine housing, and the angle was bad. Marco Rossi went in low, cleared the left, took a round through the meat of his thigh, and kept going. He did not slow. He did not speak of it. 3rd floor. At the end of the mezzanine catwalk was a heavy steel door. It was the only door on that level. The men on either side of it were down within the first 10 seconds of exchange. Alessandro gestured. 2 of his men set a small breaching charge against the lock. Boom! The door blew inward and hung on one hinge. The room beyond was a bare concrete cell. In the center stood a single wooden chair. Bound to it, hands behind her, ankles roped to the legs, a strip of gray cloth tied across her mouth, was a small figure in a torn navy coat. Annie, her eyes lifted. She saw him. A sound came out of her behind the gag that was not a scream and not a word, only the shape of a name a small girl had learned to say only weeks ago. He crossed the room in 4 strides. He dropped to his knees at the chair. He cut the rope at her wrists with the knife from his belt. He cut the rope at her ankles. He pulled the gag down from her mouth. He gathered her against him. He held her hard. "Papa is here," he whispered against her hair. "Papa is here now." At that exact moment, from the mezzanine above the doorway, a shot cracked. Vittorio De Luca had waited. Alessandro felt it before he heard it, the cold instinct of 15 years underground, the shape of a threat behind him. He twisted his body between the child and the balcony. He pressed her face into his chest. The bullet entered high in his right shoulder and drove through into his chest. Blood struck the concrete beside them in a fine, dark spray. He did not let her go. Marco Rossi fired from the doorway a controlled double tap. Vittorio was thrown back against the mezzanine rail with a round through his upper arm. Not dead, wounded. He fell. Moretti men were already on the catwalk before he hit the floor, dragging him down, pinning him against the concrete. Alessandro swayed. His knees started to give. Annie screamed against his chest. "Papa!" He did not let her go. The ambulance tore through the night. Blue and red lights swept the black facades of the Bronx, and then the long, dark stretches of the East River Road. The siren splitting the empty avenues of a New York that had not yet begun to wake. Inside, Alessandro lay on the gurney. His shirt was soaked black where the wound had gone through him. His face was the color of paper. The medic worked over the shoulder with fast, steady hands, pressing gauze that turned red the moment it touched the wool. Annie sat pressed against the side of the gurney where they had allowed her to sit. Her small hand had closed around his, and she would not let go. She was not making a sound now. The screaming was gone. Only the tears came, silent and steady, falling onto the back of his hand and onto the sheet. He opened his eyes. They swam. He found her face. Annie. His voice was almost nothing, a breath under the siren. "My daughter, read to me. Your mother's book. Inside pocket." She did not understand at first. Then she did. Her small, trembling hand went into the inner pocket of his ruined coat and drew out the worn gray-blue Bible. She stopped. There was a hole in the front cover, a ragged black hole, punched clean through several layers of pages and stopped somewhere near the back. A second bullet that no one in the room had known about. It had gone into her mother's book, and it had gone no further. She stared at it. Her mouth opened. She understood, in that moment, with a clarity that no 5-year-old should have to hold, that her mother had reached out through this book and saved her father twice, once by his heart, once by his life. Her hands shook. She opened the pages. She found the frayed red ribbon. "Philippians," she read. Her voice trembled on every word. "I can do all things, through Christ who strengthens me." Alessandro's mouth curved, faintly. His eyes closed. The medic's voice cut across the compartment. "He's losing consciousness. He's losing consciousness. Hit it!" The ambulance ran the last red lights into the emergency bay of Street Michaels. He was lifted out onto a gurney at a run. Nurses were already moving with them down the corridor. Somewhere ahead, a set of double doors swung open and swallowed him. The doors closed on Annie's face. 6 hours. She sat in the corridor outside the operating room with Rosa on one side and Marco Rossi on the other. Rosa held her against her ribs. Marco sat in a chair with his leg bandaged, the wool of his trousers cut away above the knee, and he did not speak. Annie did not sleep. She did not eat. The nurse offered her water twice, and she took a small sip both times because she did not want to be rude. She held her mother's Bible in her lap, the book with the bullet hole through its cover, and she prayed, without stopping, in a small voice under her breath. "Please don't take Papa. Please let Papa wake up. I promise I will believe in you forever." At dawn, the double doors opened. Dr. Enrico Falcone stepped out. His surgical mask had already been pulled down from his mouth. Alessandro woke after 36 hours. The early light of morning was coming through the window of the intensive care room, in a pale gold band across the floor. He blinked. The ceiling swam into focus above him. He turned his head, very slowly, because the pain in his shoulder would not let him do it any faster. The first thing he saw was her. Annie had fallen asleep with her head on the edge of his mattress, her small cheek pressed to the back of his hand. Her hand had not let go of his even in sleep. On the pillow beside her lay her mother's Bible, the bullet hole visible in the cover. He shifted his fingers, only slightly, inside her small grip. Her eyes opened. For a moment she did not move. Then she understood. Her mouth trembled. "Papa," she whispered. "Papa, you're awake." Her tears came the way tears come when a child has been holding them back for 2 whole days. He smiled, very faintly. He drew her closer to him with the arm that still worked, even though his shoulder burned. He pressed his lips against her forehead. And then he said the word he had not yet said, out loud, in his whole life. "My daughter." She broke against his chest and wrapped both arms around his neck. "I asked God," she wept. "I asked God, and he listened. He doesn't forget us. Papa, he doesn't forget." "I know, my daughter," he whispered back. "I know." 3 weeks later, Alessandro walked out of Street Michael's in a coat he had not worn since his father was alive. At the townhouse, he called Marco Rossi into the library and closed the tall doors. He stood at the window overlooking the garden, and he told him, quietly and without ceremony, that he was finished. The underground operations of the Moretti family would be dissolved. The legitimate businesses, the real estate, the restaurants, the shipping company would be signed over to Marco to run under a clean name. Vittorio De Luca, wounded and cornered, had been taken by the FBI 2 days earlier, delivered to them by an anonymous informant whom no one would ever be able to trace. "I am done, Marco," Alessandro said. "I have a bigger reason to live now." Marco lowered his head. He did not argue. He did not need to. Late autumn, on a small stone bench in a small park on the Upper East Side, a man in a dark overcoat and a little girl in a navy coat sat side by side, exactly where they had first met. He could see the sky. It was orange and violet and gold above the maples. He could see her small feet swinging above the gravel. He could see her laughing as she threw torn pieces of bread to the pigeons, and they came for her without fear. The most dangerous blindness in the world is not the blindness of the eyes. It is the blindness of a heart that has stopped believing. And the greatest miracle in the world does not come from a hospital, or from power, or from money. It comes from the pure faith of a child who reminds a grown man that he is still loved and never was forgotten. Dear friends, if this story touched something inside your heart today, please leave a comment and tell us which moment moved you the most. Was it the little girl on the bench, or the prayer at midnight, or the bullet stopped by her mother's book? We would love to hear how this story connected to your own life, because every one of us has known a season of darkness, and every one of us has been reached, at some point, by an unexpected hand. Please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and tap the bell, and give this video a like and share it with someone you love, so that we can keep bringing you heartfelt stories like this one every day. We wish every single one of you good health, a peaceful heart, and a life full of gentle joy. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of the people God has placed beside you, and we will see you again in the next story.